I used to believe my voice didn't matter, so I stayed quiet even when I had something to say. I said nothing, even when it felt wrong. I ignored it because I was afraid of being judged, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being seen. But then something happened, a moment where staying silent hurt more than speaking. And in that moment I realized something. Silence wasn't protecting me, it was erasing me. And that's when I had a choice: stay invisible or finally be heard. Hello, and thank you for being here with me today. Before this story begins, I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever felt like your voice didn't matter? Not because you had nothing to say, but because you didn't believe anyone would listen. So you stayed quiet, even when you had something to say, even when something felt wrong, even when you knew you should speak. If that feels familiar, then maybe this story is for you. My name is Ethan, and for most of my life, I avoided speaking not because I was empty, but because I was afraid. Afraid of how people would react, afraid of being judged, afraid of saying the wrong thing. And those thoughts were always there, quiet but constant. What if I sound stupid? What if they don't agree? What if I embarrass myself? So I stayed quiet again and again. At first, it didn't feel like a problem. It just felt normal. I told myself, I'm just a quiet person. I don't need to talk much. I'm better at listening. And in some ways, that was true. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed things people didn't say. I understood emotions before they were explained. But there was something else, something I didn't see at the time. Every time I stayed silent, I was slowly disappearing, not from the world, but from myself. Because every thought I didn't share, every feeling I kept inside, every moment I held back, it all stayed with me. And over time, it became heavy, not loud, not obvious, just there, a quiet weight I carried every day. And the strange thing was, no one noticed, because from the outside, everything looked fine. I smiled, I nodded, I listened. I was easy to talk to. But inside, there were things I wanted to say, ideas, opinions, questions, all of them staying quiet because that voice never left. What if you're wrong? What if they judge you? What if you ruin the moment? And every time that voice won, I stayed safe. But safety came with a cost. I stopped expressing myself. I stopped sharing my thoughts. I stopped taking up space. And slowly, I started to feel something, not sadness, not fear, but something quieter, disconnection. Like I was there, but not really there. Like I was living my life from a distance. And sometimes, late at night, when everything was quiet, I would think about all the things I didn't say, all the moments I stayed silent, all the chances I let pass. And one question kept coming back. What would happen if I actually spoke? But every time I asked that question, another one followed. What if it goes wrong? And just like that, I stayed the same day after day, conversation after conversation, moment after moment, until one day, something felt different, not outside, but inside. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a quiet feeling I couldn't ignore anymore, a thought that stayed longer than usual. What if staying silent is the real mistake? That thought changed something, not everything, not immediately, but enough. Enough to make me pause, enough to make me question, enough to make me notice. Because, for the first time, I wasn't just afraid of speaking. I was afraid of what my life would look like if I never did. And that fear felt different. It wasn't about judgment. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about regret. And somehow, that felt heavier, heavier than fear, heavier than silence. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, not into confidence, not into courage, but into awareness. I began to see something clearly. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I was afraid to be seen. And maybe that's the real reason. Not that your voice doesn't matter, but that you're afraid of what happens when people finally hear it. And if that's true, then maybe the problem is not your voice. Maybe it's the fear around it. And maybe, just maybe, your life begins to change the moment you stop hiding it. And maybe that moment doesn't look the way you expect. It's not loud. It's not perfect. It's not some big speech that changes everything overnight. It's small, almost invisible, a single sentence you almost don't say. A thought you almost keep inside. A moment where your heart beats faster and your mind says, stay quiet. But this time, you don't. You speak anyway. And maybe your voice shakes. Maybe your words aren't perfect. Maybe you pause in the middle, but you finish, and nothing breaks. The world doesn't end. People don't turn away. In fact, some people don't even react at all. And strangely, that's what changes everything, because you realize the fear was louder than reality. The story in your head was heavier than the truth. And for the first time, you see it clearly. Your voice was never the problem. It was the silence you kept choosing. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You start noticing every moment you hold back, every time you shrink yourself, every time you almost speak but don't, and slowly, very slowly, you begin to choose differently, not every time, not perfectly, but more than before. And that's how it begins, not with confidence, but with a decision, a quiet decision, to stop abandoning yourself, to stop hiding your thoughts, to stop waiting for the perfect moment, because that moment rarely comes. But your life is happening now, and your voice is part of it. At first, silence felt safe. When you don't speak, you don't get criticized. When you don't share, you don't get rejected. When you don't stand out, you don't feel exposed. It felt simple. It felt logical. It felt smart. So I chose it again and again. And slowly, that silence became part of me, not just something I did, but something I believed. I became the quiet one, the one who listens, the one who nods, the one who understands but rarely responds. People saw me and they felt comfortable. They said, he's easy to talk to, he's calm, he's simple. And I smiled because that was true, at least on the surface. But inside, there was another story, a quieter and deeper one. There were thoughts I never shared, opinions I kept to myself, feelings I didn't know how to express, and truths I wasn't brave enough to say. At first, it didn't bother me because silence still felt like protection. But over time, something started to change, very slowly, almost invisibly. Silence didn't feel safe anymore. It felt heavy, like I was holding something inside that wanted to be heard. And no matter how quiet I stayed, that feeling didn't go away. It grew in small moments, in conversations, and especially in silence. I would sit with people, listening, smiling, nodding, but inside there was a voice, a quiet voice, asking something simple. Why aren't you speaking? And I didn't have an answer, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Was I quiet because I wanted to be, or because I didn't know how to be anything else? That question stayed with me, not loud, not urgent, but constant, and the more I noticed it, the harder it became to ignore, because something didn't feel right. Not wrong, not broken, just incomplete, like I was living only half of myself, the part that listens, the part that observes, the part that understands, but not the part that speaks, not the part that expresses, not the part that shows up fully and slowly. That realization became uncomfortable, because I began to see something clearly. Silence was no longer protecting me, it was limiting me. It was keeping me small, keeping me hidden, keeping me safe, but also unseen. And that word, unseen, stayed with me, because I started to feel it in conversations, in groups, in moments that mattered. I was there, but not really there. People talked, people shared, people expressed themselves, and I listened, but I didn't participate, not fully. And sometimes, after those moments ended, I would think back about what I could have said, what I wanted to say, what I almost said but didn't. And those moments stayed with me not as regret at first, but as something else. A quiet tension between who I was and who I could be. And that tension grew day by day, until one day it felt too loud to ignore. I remember that moment. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't special, just a normal conversation. Someone asked a simple question, and I knew the answer, not perfectly, not confidently, but enough to say something. And for a second, I felt that familiar hesitation, that voice again telling me, don't say it. What if you're wrong? What if it sounds stupid? But this time, something was different. Another thought appeared. What if staying silent is worse? And that thought felt heavier than fear, heavier than doubt, heavier than everything that had been holding me back in that moment. I realized something. Silence had been protecting me from discomfort, but it was also keeping me away from connection, from growth, from being seen. And maybe that's the real cost, not rejection, not embarrassment, but invisibility. And suddenly, that didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like loss, the loss of voice, the loss of presence, the loss of self. And that was the moment everything started to shift. Not because I became confident, not because I stopped being afraid, but because I started to see the truth. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a quiet mask. Once you see that, you can't unsee it, because deep down you begin to understand something. Your voice is not the problem. Your fear of using it is. And maybe, just maybe, the life you want is waiting on the other side of that voice. And maybe crossing that line doesn't require something big, not a new personality, not perfect confidence, not a fearless version of you, just a small step. A moment where you choose honesty over comfort, where you choose expression over silence. Even if your voice is quiet, even if your words feel unsure, because the truth is, your voice doesn't need to be loud to be real. It doesn't need to be perfect to matter. It just needs to be used. And the first time you do it, it feels strange and unfamiliar, like stepping into a version of yourself you don't fully recognize yet, but also a version that feels closer to you, more honest, more present, more alive. And something shifts, not outside but inside. You feel it in a quiet way, a small release, like something that was stuck finally moved, like something hidden finally saw light. That feeling stays with you. It follows you into the next moment and the next, until slowly speaking becomes less about fear and more about truth, less about how you sound and more about what you feel. And you begin to understand that this was never about being heard by everyone. It was about not losing yourself in silence. Because every time you speak, even just a little, you come back to yourself. And in those small moments, something new begins to form, not confidence all at once, but a quiet trust in your own voice, a growing sense that you are allowed to take up space, that your thoughts deserve to exist outside your mind, and that being seen is not something to fear, but something to accept, one honest word at a time. Then one day, something happened. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was enough to change everything. It was a normal day, nothing special or unusual. I was in a group discussion where people were talking, ideas were being shared, voices overlapping, and opinions moving quickly. Everyone seemed confident, everyone seemed sure, and I stayed quiet, like always, listening, observing, waiting. Then suddenly, something shifted. Someone was blamed, unfairly. It wasn't obvious at first, but I could see it, I could feel it. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I knew what really happened, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to say something. In that moment, everything slowed down. The room felt quieter, even though people were still talking. My focus narrowed, my thoughts sharpened, and all I could feel was that moment, that tension, that pressure, that choice, say nothing or speak. And suddenly, it wasn't just a conversation anymore. It felt like a real decision. My heart started racing faster than usual. My chest felt tight, my breathing changed, and my hands felt cold. Then that voice returned, the same voice I had listened to for years. Don't get involved. Stay out of it. It's not your problem. It sounded familiar, even comforting, like it always did, because that voice had kept me safe before. It had protected me from judgment, from embarrassment, from mistakes. And for a second, I almost listened. I felt my body freeze. My voice stayed inside, just like always, just like every other time, and everything started to feel normal again, safe again. But then something changed. Something inside me felt different, not loud, not strong, but clear. A quiet thought appeared. If I stay silent now, I will regret it. That thought felt heavier than anything else, heavier than fear, heavier than doubt. It didn't shout or push, it just stayed. And somehow it felt true, not logical, not comfortable, but true. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about being right. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about the situation. It was about me, about who I was choosing to be. And for the first time, that choice felt different, because before, I chose silence to feel safe. But now silence felt wrong, not because it was quiet, but because it wasn't honest. That feeling was something I couldn't ignore, even if I tried, even if I wanted to, because deep down I knew something. If I stayed silent now, nothing would change, not the situation, not the moment, and definitely not me. And suddenly, that scared me more than speaking, more than being judged, more than anything else. Because I had seen this before so many times. Moments where I stayed quiet, moments where I held back, moments where I chose fear, and every time it felt the same, safe but empty, protected but small. And I didn't want that anymore. Not this time, not again. So I stood there between two choices, stay silent or finally speak. And for the first time, I didn't focus on fear. I focused on regret, on what I would feel later, on what I would think when this moment was gone. And the answer was clear: I would regret silence more than anything else. And that realization changed everything, because, for the first time, fear was not the strongest voice. And truth is hard to ignore, even when it's quiet, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it asks something you're not ready for. In that moment, I understood something simple. Courage is not loud. It doesn't feel powerful. It doesn't remove fear. It just shows up quietly, right when you need it. And maybe this was that moment, the moment where everything could stay the same or finally begin to change. I felt it: not confidence, not strength, just a small push, a quiet decision I couldn't take back. So I opened my mouth slowly and carefully, and for a second, no words came out. Just silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than noise. My heart was still racing. My thoughts were still unsure. But then I said it: not perfectly, not strongly, just honestly. It was a simple sentence, but it was enough to interrupt, enough to be heard, and everything paused. Voices stopped, eyes turned, the room shifted, and for a split second, I felt exposed, like I had stepped into the light after hiding for so long. It was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, but I didn't stop. I continued slowly and clearly, saying what I believed was true, not to prove anything, not to win, just to be real. And when I finished, something unexpected happened. Nothing dramatic, no applause, no big reaction. But this time, it felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the moment had space now, like something missing was finally there. Then someone responded calmly and thoughtfully, not attacking, not rejecting, just listening, and others followed. The conversation changed slightly, but enough to feel it in that moment. I realized something. Speaking didn't destroy the moment, it completed it. And more importantly, I didn't disappear. I was still there, still okay, still myself. But something had shifted, something small but powerful. For the first time, I didn't choose silence, I chose me. And after that moment passed, I carried a new feeling with me, a quiet understanding that my voice didn't have to be perfect to matter. It just had to be used, even in small ways, even in uncertain moments. Because every time I chose to speak, I was no longer just existing in the background. I was stepping into my own life, one honest word at a time. So I spoke, not loudly, not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. My voice wasn't strong, it wasn't smooth, it wasn't impressive, and it didn't sound like the others. But it was real, and in that moment, that was enough. I could feel it, the words leaving my mouth slowly, carefully, uncertain but true, and for a second, everything felt still. Like time paused, like the room was waiting to react, waiting to respond, and I braced myself for judgment, for silence, for rejection, for everything I had imagined before. But then something unexpected happened. People listened, not quickly, not impatiently, but fully. They didn't interrupt, they didn't look away, they stayed, and that surprised me. Because, in my mind, it was supposed to go wrong. I was supposed to feel embarrassed. I was supposed to regret speaking, but none of that happened. Instead, there was space for my words, space for my voice, sand in that space. Something changed, not outside, but inside me, for the first time. I wasn't just thinking, I wasn't just observing. I wasn't just listening, I was part of it, part of the moment, part of the conversation. And that feeling was new, not overwhelming, not dramatic, but real. And somehow it stayed with me, even after I stopped speaking, even after the conversation moved on, even after everything returned to normal, because something inside me had shifted. Not in a big way, not in a loud way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. Like a small door had finally opened, and behind it was something I hadn't felt before: presence. I was there, fully there, not hiding, not shrinking, not holding back, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to be heard, not perfectly understood, not fully agreed with, but heard, and that was enough. More than enough, because I realized something simple but powerful. Your voice doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to impress. It doesn't need to stand out. It just needs to exist, to be expressed, to be shared. And maybe that's what we forget. We wait to feel ready. We wait to feel confident. We wait for the right moment. But that moment rarely comes, because confidence doesn't come first, action does. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. I didn't need to be ready. I just needed to try, to show up, to speak, even if it felt uncomfortable, even if it felt uncertain, because staying silent was no longer the safer choice. And familiar is not always better. Sometimes it's just easier. Growth doesn't happen in easy places. It happens in moments like that, moments where your voice shakes, moments where your heart races, moments where you choose to speak anyway. And maybe that's what courage really is: not confidence, not certainty, but action despite fear. And if you've been staying quiet, not because you want to, but because you're afraid, I understand that. I've been there. I know how it feels to hold back, to overthink, to doubt yourself, to believe your voice is not enough. But that belief is not the truth. It's just fear. And fear can be wrong, because the moment you speak, you begin to see something. Not everyone is judging you. Not everyone is waiting for you to fail. Most people are just listening, just like you were. And maybe they're waiting for someone else to be real first, to be honest first, to speak first. And maybe that someone is you, so you don't need to be confident. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need the right words. You just need to start. One sentence, one moment, one choice, because your voice matters more than you think. And the thing you're most afraid to say might be the exact thing that needs to be heard, not just by others, but by you. And maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's yours too. Maybe there have been moments where you wanted to speak, but didn't. Moments where something felt wrong, but you stayed quiet. Moments where your voice was right there, but never heard. And if that's you, I want you to remember something simple. Your voice is not too small. Your thoughts are not unimportant. And your truth is not something you need to hide. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need the right words. You don't even need confidence. You just need one moment. One moment where you choose differently. Because that's how it starts. Not with a big change. Not with a perfect version of you. But with one small decision to finally speak. And maybe that moment is closer than you think. So if this story stayed with you, even just a little, take that as a sign. A quiet reminder that your voice matters more than you've ever believed. And if you're ready to stop staying silent, then stay with me, because this is just the beginning. And maybe what stays with you most is not what others said, but what you felt, that quiet shift inside, that moment where something finally clicked. Because after that day, things didn't magically change. I didn't become confident overnight. I didn't suddenly speak all the time. I still hesitated. I still doubted, but something was different. Silence no longer felt the same. It didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a choice I was now aware of. And once you see that, you can't go back. Because now every time I stayed quiet, I noticed it. I felt it. That small tension again. That question coming back. Is this who you want to be? And sometimes I still chose silence, but not blindly, not automatically. And other times I chose differently, small moments, short sentences, simple thoughts spoken out loud. And each time it got a little easier. Not comfortable, but possible. And that was enough, because I realized this isn't about becoming someone else. It's about stopping hiding who you already are. And that journey doesn't start with confidence. It starts with one honest moment. And before you go, I want you to stop just for a second, right here, right now, and think about this. How many times have you stayed quiet when you wanted to speak? How many moments have you let pass because fear felt louder than truth? And more importantly, how many more are you willing to lose? Because life doesn't wait. Moments don't repeat. Chances don't come back the same way. And your voice is not something you save for someday. It's something you use now. Even if it shakes, even if it's unsure, even if it's not perfect. Because one day you will look back at the conversations you avoided, the truths you didn't say, the version of you kept hidden. And the question won't be, was I good enough? It will be, why didn't I try? So don't wait for confidence. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because that moment is this one, right here. And maybe you won't change everything today. But maybe you'll do one small thing differently. Speak once, share once, show up just a little more, and that's how everything begins. So, if this story stayed with you, even just a little, don't ignore it. Because that feeling is not random, it's a signal. A quiet push telling you it's time to stop hiding, time to stop shrinking, time to finally be heard. And if you're ready, not to be perfect, but to be real, then stay with me, because this is only the beginning.